What's your take on Manchester United? Actually, we do have Daniel Harris there. Daniel, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, thanks. Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good. We've already had our debate about the merits or otherwise of Bruno Fernandes digging out Victor Lindelof. So maybe we'll park that for now and come back to it. What are the lessons to be learned from the fact that Manchester United ran out of steam towards the end of that game last night?
Ultimately, they need better players. Harry Maguire said that United deserved to win last night, but, that's obviously a load of bollocks. I can see why he thought that, but there's a handy metric for determining which team deserved to win a football match, and it's called the score. And United scored fewer goals than Sevilla, so they deserve to lose. They need to finish better, but as you say, they did run out of steam last night after about 15, 20 minutes of the second half. And the problem there was they didn't have anything to bring on off the bench. And I'm sure Ole knows that substitutes are handy, given obviously that he used to be quite a handy substitute himself, but he couldn't bring himself to bring anyone on because the quality on the bench is insufficient. So even if you had just one more attacker, that would have made a big difference last night. But in terms of other problems that United have, I think that if you look at the way Liverpool play, they play with two wide attackers. And the reason they're able to do that, with Mane and Salah playing basically on their wrong foot so they can come in, is because they've got two fullbacks that keep the width. And United didn't have that last night. Like Wan-Bissaka, who I think is a really good defender, just had a nightmare last night, and he didn't really want to try getting outside Greenwood and going down the line. And Greenwood definitely wanted to come inside. And on the other side, you have Brandon Williams, who is a left-back, who's always been a left-back, but he's still right-footed, and he didn't really want to go wide. He didn't really want to get down the line either. And so it all got a bit tight and a bit narrow. That meant Sevilla could basically just stick loads of men in the middle of the box, and they defended the box really well, but you didn't particularly think United were going to score once they went behind. And I think that's quite a lot of the reason. So the way that you would address that ultimately is by buying players. You need to buy a right wing. Obviously, we know United are trying to buy Jadon Sancho, and as I said, he would have made a very big difference last night, I think.
It's the chickens coming home to roost of 5 years, 7 years, 8 years of bad investment in players who are just a level below where Manchester United need them to be in a European semi-final. You need to be able to bring on players who are going to change the game. That's the quality of footballer you actually need. Or you need to be an absolute genius manager who's getting the very best out of some mediocre players. And Manchester United don't have either of those two things at the moment.
I'm not sure I can think of too many genius managers who've got European semi-final defining games out of mediocre players. They might have players who aren't as good as the other players who they can bring on to make a difference, but they'll still be around those other players. So I wouldn't particularly blame Ole's lack of managerial genius for not having good enough players to bring on, or not having crap players who he can make into something useful, because he doesn't have that. Like Ighalo, Mata, they're old. Like, you're not going to change them into becoming something that they're not. I think one of the other problems we saw with United last night is still the balance in midfield, because you've got Bruno Fernandes, who is more or less knocking about, waiting to influence the game. You can't really have another midfielder who's trying to do that. And Pogba is sort of trying to do that. He did some beautiful stuff last night, but we didn't see enough of him. And I think that in order to balance a player like Fernandes, you need Pogba really to be a box-to-box player who is constantly involved. And I think he has the legs and the stamina to do that. I don't think he's been told to do that. I'm not particularly blaming Pogba for this. And I think what I'm kind of talking about really is the difference between a 4-2-3-1 formation, which Ole likes, and a 4-3-3 formation, which I think is better. Because it means you can commit an extra man forward when you're attacking, but that man also has defensive responsibilities. And the problem with a player like Pogba is he's a great long passer, but you also want him on the ball around the box. And the only way you're getting both of those things out of him is if he is detailed to run up and down. And I don't think that's what's happening. So I don't think United are getting the most out of him, and I don't think he's getting the most out of himself either.
Does that mean there's a ceiling here with even if they sign Sancho, that actually the midfield is still, the constellation of the midfield still isn't sufficiently flexible to allow Manchester United to be a team who competes for the Champions League and for the Premier League, which, let's face it, is actually, that's a requirement. You're Man United, you're supposed to be trying and ready every season to win either of those two competitions. If his system is slightly inflexible or is almost allowing the players to decide what's going to happen in it, then that would suggest that maybe there is a ceiling to where Solskjaer can take the team.
I would say nothing that Solskjaer says suggests that the players are just told to go out there and make it up. People might not agree with the plans that he gives them, but nothing that he says suggests that they're just going out there and expressing themselves. He definitely wants them to express themselves, but he talks about the attacking movements that they work on. Like when he's asked good questions about tactics, I think he's actually quite good about explaining the way that he wants his team to play. So I don't think it's that. In terms of what the ceiling is, to win the Champions League, I think that United are quite close to having players good enough to win a Champions League, because Champions League is a cup competition. And ultimately, if you've got great attackers, then you can be good enough to beat any team. So it's possible. You've seen teams do that in the Champions League just because they've got really good individuals. I mean, Real Madrid won 3 in a row, and they did it much more by having great individuals than by being this great coherent 11, which with a great manager, they didn't have either of those things. So I do think it's possible for United to do something in the Champions League next season just with 1 or 2 signings. But ideally, I think they need 3 or 4 signings. And I'm not sure that even Pogba's necessarily the problem, but perhaps the problem is the third player. So in the league, but Ole was playing Matic wherever he could, because I think ultimately he felt that he wanted someone reliable, reliable in his mind, who was always going to be more or less in the same place in front of the back 4. But I don't know if it's just because it's hot in Germany, but he's preferred Fred in the last couple of games, and Fred gives you something different. He gives you the legs that Matic doesn't have, and he also gives you passing that Matic doesn't. When Fred gets the ball, he looks to move the ball forward quickly. Now, I don't think that Fred has the necessary quality to do that at the level United want, but it suggests a slight evolution of the style. And so if you look at United and you think about what does this team need, I think it's quite clear, and I've been saying this to you for quite some time, it needs a better centre-back than Lindelof. I think we saw that with significant clarity last night. It needs a right winger, United trying to sign Jadon Sancho, and it needs a midfielder to play with Pogba and Fernandes. And I think that we saw again last night that Ole thinks that he needs that too, because he played Fred and not Matic. Whether he gets the money to do those things, and you talked about 7 or 8 years of poor purchases from United, but really that reflects the 7, 8 years before that of Glazer ownership, because as soon as the Glazers took over, United were more or less always making do and always chasing and always trying to find a way of getting around things. And when David Moyes took over, the team that he inherited, they were champions, but they were like this old, clapped out machine that only the crazy inventor can get to work. And so rather than, if you look at what had been going on at City in the end of the Fergie era, they were buying Yaya Toure, they were buying Sergio Aguero, they were buying David Silva. United were buying Chris Smalling, they were buying Phil Jones, they were buying Ashley Young, buying Shinji Kagawa, players not at that level. And so they were having to make do. And they had a genius of a manager who was able to make that work. But what they're trying to do now is they're trying to buy players who are good. You want them to buy players who are good. And that does come back to your point about not having a manager who is able to take players of that level. But the other thing about Fergie is while he was getting performances out of the kind of players I just mentioned, he had proper serious players like Wayne Rooney and Robin van Persie and Michael Carrick. And what Ole is doing is he's hoping that the players that he has, the better players that he has, are going to ascend to that level. Martial, Rashford, Greenwood, Fernandes. He wants those players to ascend. And if that happens, then obviously it's easier for you to carry the other less good players that you have. But he still needs work to do on there's still a lot of work to do on the essentials.
Daniel, there's clearly been a dip since Manchester United's initial form after the return of football. What percentage of that would you put down to the fact that they are clearly exhausted? Like, there has to be a part of it as well that teams have figured out the Manchester United front 4, so to speak, a little bit too.
Well, I thought the first hour last night, the football that they produced was as good as anything they've produced under Ole. So I'm not sure that if there's exactly been a dip. I think they got tired and they were really poor. The West Ham game is one that stands out, but where they basically ran out of ideas and they didn't create very much. But last night, I felt that was the highest level. That was the highest level game I've seen United play in a long time. In that they were playing another good team, and they were both having at it, and it was a proper end-to-end game in which United was superior for the first hour. And I don't think that is a regression at all. I think that's progression. There's lots of different ways you can lose a football match, and creating loads of chances, playing really well, missing the chances, and getting caught is such that there is a best way of losing is probably the best way of losing, because it means that you're doing the right things and you're going in the right direction. So I don't think I entirely agree to say that United have dipped, because I thought they played some absolutely great football against Copenhagen, and for an hour last night, I would say that is some of the best stuff they played in probably 3 or 4 seasons.
Do you not think against Copenhagen there was not a lack of invention, but perhaps a lack of incision going forward? I know they had a few chances last night, and Bono, the Sevilla keeper, did quite well to keep them out on a number of cases. And like as you say, the scoreline is all that matters, but you can see where Harry Maguire comes from last night. At the same time, you do look at the Copenhagen game, and certainly in my opinion, I thought, is this attack starting to look a little bit more blunt than we had initially thought, despite the fact that all the main players are still there from the resumption of football?
I don't agree. I mean, I thought it took them half an hour to get going against Copenhagen, and I wouldn't blame the attack for that, blame all of them for that. But and sometimes it happens. It took them half an hour to get going, but after it took them half an hour to get going, they made lots and lots of chances. And they made lots and lots of chances through the end of the first half, through the second half, and through extra time. So I felt like the finishing needed to be more precise, but the chances that they were missing were not, to me, half chances particularly. They were opportunities where you would expect the players to score. So you might say that the finishing wasn't good enough, and wonder if that would be a problem in the future if you have players who aren't reliable finishers. And I think that Rashford particularly is not a particularly reliable finisher. Martial is good at the difficult ones, needs to still get a little bit better at the easier ones. But I wasn't particularly feeling a lack of incision, because I felt that they had a lot of shots on target, and giving the Copenhagen keeper the opportunity to have a great game. And if the other keeper has a great game, as they did last night, then there are two things. Number one, you can say, well played, but ultimately I would blame the finishing. I wouldn't blame the lack of creativity and the lack of decision.
Fair enough. Just one more on that. How close do you think Marcus Rashford is to putting in a 20-goal season in the next couple of years? Because that's obviously what you will expect from Marcus Rashford. I mean, 20 goals in the Premier League, obviously. It was 17 in the past campaign, which isn't a bad tally, Daniel, despite the fact that you would probably pick him out as maybe the weakest of the front three form-wise since football came back in the summer.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's got 17 league goals, and he broke his back. So if he hadn't got injured, then I'm pretty sure he would have his 20 league goals. But yeah, I agree. I think in an ideal world, he probably wouldn't have started last night, because he hasn't been playing that well. I think that I keep reading it's mainly Twitter, which is obviously not necessarily a good barometer of sensible opinions, but that he's been playing out his arse for ages. But he played really well against Palace, which was 4 or 5 games ago. So he's not been in a run of terrible form for a long time, but he hasn't played well since Palace. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that had Jadon Sancho been around, Rashford probably wouldn't have played last night. But Rashford did win the penalty, and if someone had been following in the free kick that he took, as they should have been, then he also would have created another goal. So even on a bad day, he's still creating opportunities, and he's still getting himself into positions as well, because it wasn't, again, and this is kind of related to the point about what I said about a good way to lose. You would prefer to lose creating loads of chances than doing nothing. I would rather Rashford was getting into positions and missing and fluffing his lines than just doing nothing. And I think the problem with him last night was when he got opportunities to do something good, he mainly didn't. He still did do a couple of good things while he was there, which is positive. But yeah, if United had a genuine alternative instead of him, he probably wouldn't have started the game last night, and he certainly would have been brought off before he was. So I think that, yeah, so I'll go back to the original question. 17 goals and no broken back would probably be 20 league goals.
Last question. We've had this debate on the show a good bit about how far behind Manchester United's front three are versus the front three at Liverpool or the front three at City, for example. What's your view? How far behind are those front three from the other two? And let's face it, that's where the league titles will be won and lost over the coming seasons.
I would say that I don't think it's about the front three exactly, about the individual players and the way they combine. I think United's front three are really good at that. I think it's about the way that your team works as in order to work with the front three that you have. So I'm coming back to what I said before, that Liverpool's front three works really well with the way that Liverpool play. They have two fullbacks that go forward and stay wide, and they're able to facilitate that with a midfield that lacks a bit of technical quality, but has a lot of legs that enables them to cover for the fullback. And that's the way that Liverpool go about it. And they have a centre forward who holds the ball up. So when they go through the middle, they have someone like Firmino who doesn't score that many goals, but he's effectively another playmaker. So yeah, Firmino and the fullbacks are effectively Liverpool's playmakers, and that works really well with the two wide attackers that they have. United, they have their individual front three have the ability to be as good as Liverpool City's front three. But the first thing is that they're quite a lot younger. They're still learning the game, whereas Salah and Mana are at their peaks. This is what they are. They're not getting better now, but they are at the absolute peak of their powers. Whereas Martial, Rashford, Greenwood are learning to play. So what United first of all need to do, as I say, is in order to fit the way United want to play, United want to get lots of men forward. And for that to be the case, you need to have defenders who are comfortable defending one-on-one. So people criticise Wan-Bissaka, whose defending yesterday was also horrible. But in general, that's not the case. People criticise him for not being as good as Liverpool's fullbacks getting forward. But the composition of United's midfield is different to Liverpool's. United rely on their midfield for their creativity, not the centre forward and not the fullbacks. So the job of the fullbacks need to be, first of all, to be able to defend one-on-one. But if you have fullbacks who are there in order to defend, then you need attackers who are going to be able to go on the outside. And United don't have that.
Yeah.
So what they need is, whether it's Jadon Sancho, whether it's Kingsley Coman, they need a right winger who will be able to do that, to get around the back. And that's not so much to do with the individual players, it's to do with the descriptions, it's to do with the kind of players that they are. So in terms of the goals, the ability to score, the ability to create out of nothing, United absolutely have that in attack. They probably don't yet have the composure that Liverpool and City's attackers have in front of goal in big games. But, I mean, we saw City against Lyon that there was also composure in front of goal. I mean, all strikers will miss chances. And they'll all miss chances in big games, all of them. There's no striker you'll be able to find where you can't point to that was a bad miss from that player at that point. It's about, and you're much more concerned with the team, with attackers, if they're not getting opportunities. With United, it's more about refining the style of the team play and signing the right players to fit in the holes that we can all see that exists. Yeah. And Liverpool already have filled those holes. So they are a coherent unit that it took Jurgen Klopp 2 or 3 years to build. He built it, and now he's fine-tuning. But United, they're still in the building process, and the question is whether Ole's going to be afforded the money to be able to get what he needs or not.
We're about to find out. Daniel, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
See you again, lads.
Daniel Harris giving us some thoughts there on the Man United situation. We'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180 is the number for that one. In the front three, just as good as the other two, just a little bit younger.
Not for me. Okay, the little bit younger caveat is an interesting part of that, but right now, nowhere close. I would put it to you that Manchester United would be interested in signing an attacker from every single other team in the top 8 that would, on form, currently improve their front three. Any other team in the top 8, Manchester United could look at them and say, yeah, I'll have a bit of that attack, and that player would start for their team. So you can go through the table if you want, and they got a player in each team.